Hello and welcome back to the Insight series, episode 3. This is our final series where we look at brand uplift and understanding what your customers think. So today, your presenters are myself, who will be hosting the session, who is Joanne Emden from the product team, and with me I have.
Hi there, my name's Joe. I'm lead data scientist at Crimtan and was responsible for putting together the brand awareness and uplift study that we're going to talk through today.
And thank you for joining us today, Joe. And before we go into the full agenda for today, for anyone who's on the call that's not familiar with who we are a programmatic media partner that specialises across multiple different channels. Our proprietary technology and our cookieless solution enables us to plan, activate and measure campaigns. Previously, we focused on insights in the planning, but today we're going to be looking at measurement and how those insights can help us as well. So what is the agenda today? What we'll be speaking about is what is brand uplift. I'm sure everyone's quite familiar of the term out there, but how are we actually defining it and how can we measure it? Industry challenges. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing out there at the moment? How do we measure at Crimtan and the value of that in terms of complementing those industry challenges? And then also Joe is taking us through a case study today, just to put that into real life context for us. So let's start off with by understanding what is brand uplift and how can we measure it, Joe?
Yeah. Brand uplift is a way of measuring the fundamental thing in marketing, brand awareness. If you're not aware of a product, you're not going to search for it, you're not going to buy it at the end of the day. So at the heart of it, that's what we're trying to work on. As a programmatic agency, we're trying to fill the top of the funnel as much as possible, and we want to measure that. How do you measure that? The key is in the name, uplift. You want to understand how much higher is brand awareness than what you'd expect. Got many different ways of measuring it, but that's the fundamental question at its heart.
And in terms of, I guess, with brand and measuring, that brand uplift or awareness or consideration, what are some of the challenges that you think that people are seeing out there in the market? And, how would some of these brands consider some of these challenges?
For sure. I guess the challenges come from the traditional way of measuring brand uplift. In the past, the only way of quantifying brand awareness, quite a fuzzy term, is by using surveys or panel-based data. Surveys and panel-based data come out to users with key questions. Have you come across this brand? How favorably do you feel about them? Would you prefer them over another company? And so on. That has its positives. You can ask very detailed questions, but it does have its limitations in terms of you have to have the survey in the first place. And obviously, as we talked about in the previous webinars, anything survey-based has that statistical limitation. You're working on statistical significance based on sample size rather than the entire population. And that means that it can be expensive, time-consuming, and then finally you're relying on those very specific questions. If you get them wrong, if you ask the wrong thing, your entire survey you've caused some kind of methodological problem. And also you're relying on your respondents to remember things. I work in marketing with the ads I saw yesterday. However, I'm still being impacted by those ads because we know ads work at a subconscious level.
So in a way, some of the challenges what some of the brands on the call might be seeing is, you're limited by scale with some panel-based, and also, the clear thing there is being very subjective in terms of how you might answer it. But how are some of the ways that we sort of tackle these challenges in the industry, and how do we actually measure brand uplift? How do we consider it at Crimtan, basically?
For sure. When we started out, we had the self-same questions, the same limitations. However, we're a digital agency. We want to really demonstrate the value behind our work. And that's where our particular methodology for brand uplift comes from. The way that we base it, instead of using survey-based, which samples a population or a sample within a population, we look at overall search demand. 80% of all purchases go through a research phase in a search engine. And if we're able to measure that, we're picking up demand right at the top of that funnel, the same brand awareness that we're looking for. It's a proxy for the same metric. The way that we quantify this, that's brand awareness. How do we quantify that uplift? The uplift comes from a statistical methodology we've adapted from medical research. The way that they do that is they construct a baseline or a control. So users who either haven't been subjected to the treatment or users kind of simulated to have not been treated by what we're going with, in our case, adverts. And then you compare that against actuals. How much higher is brand demand than you'd expect? That's what we're measuring.
And I guess just to break it down a little bit further for anyone in the audience there, what are the key sort of values that we're taking out of this, if you had to just name a couple of using something like this type of methodology of measuring brand uplift?
Sure. This methodology is quite unique in that it offers a time series perspective. You can see how demand changes over time. Because we go back so far, we're able to also look to a great degree of accuracy. So we can say there are 20 extra searches than there were before, which is really exciting. But we can also look at whether that impact is sudden spike, a really impactful campaign that users remember and then falls away, or is it a long-term gain that holds users, sticks in their minds, like a drumming gorilla, for example.
So that's great to know that we can actually look at that long-term spike, because I think some of the challenges I can imagine is with survey data, it's just a short term for sure. And sometimes I think some of the challenges of doing a brand study over a long period of time could be, you're going to see a less of effect there. And so the long-term spike is better to understand from that brand uplift perspective. But I guess one of the key things that might also be on somebody's mind out there, in terms of, because we're using search data, it's not necessarily exclusive to display. So when we're talking about other channels in the market and isolating them from our activity, how do we actually control for that other media? So if we're not running personally their connected TV, budgets, and we're just doing display, for example.
For sure. It's a really difficult question, and it's something that even traditional surveys were unable to answer. Their old methodology was, have you seen a search ad? Have you seen a social ad? And trying to control that way. We're able to adapt the methodology that we use. We didn't come up with the statistics behind this. We're using medical methodology. The way that they do it is by combining different data sets into the same model. We use each of these different channels, so social marketing, or even offline marketing, to be honest, things like newspapers, we can integrate into this time series model. And just as social might spike and then brand awareness might spike at the same time, the model is able to attribute that uplift to social exclusively. And the same to programmatic, it can split those things out really effectively and with a degree of statistical significance.
It sounds really interesting that it can sort of isolate it as well. And I guess one of the things we might want to know is actually, can we use this type of brand study to measure other media rather than just from our own activation? We've measured brand uplift, but could be, for example, look at whether that other media has driven that brand uplift as well.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Marketing should never be done in a silo. We know this, that you wouldn't just run a social campaign. That would be so surreal. You build a campaign that speaks different things to different players. It's omni-channel. And being able to measure that is crucial. You can't just say, this campaign had this impact. You've got to split it out. So you can optimize those spends across different channels. And that's very much the methodology we work with. We want to isolate those impacts as best we can.
That's great to know. And I guess you've taken us through everything so far, but I think what's really useful for people in the audience is to understand a real life case study and how we put that into context. So could you just talk us through the case study that you've brought along today, what type of client it was and some of the key questions that they had for us?
For sure. Yeah, this is a really fun example, if I'm honest, and I'm glad I'm able to share this. We were working with a global furniture brand in the JPAC region. They were running a brand campaign. They're already very well known, one of the top global furniture brands there are, and they were interested in understanding what was the incremental impact of a brand campaign through programmatic, which is quite a big ask at the end of the day because they're so well known. And that was it, their primary question. They already have a very strong brand focus. They want to understand what that impact was, particularly when programmatic wasn't their lead channel and it was on top of a suite of different marketing tools they were running. And the second question, whilst they were very brand led, they were also very cost focused. They work on quite tight margins and really want people to come into their stores. So they wanted to understand what was the bang they were getting for their buck. Can we relate some kind of link between spend and brand awareness? And then can we recommend them how much they should be spending long term? As you mentioned, how can they maintain that brand awareness over time?
There's some really interesting questions that they had. And so what did we actually do to address these questions? What was the methodology in terms of looking at how to address those?
Mm-hmm. Complicated questions for sure. We started off by building our baseline and our brand indexes. So the branding question, we wanted to make sure that we were modeling as much of their search demand as possible. So we built out a large keyword portfolio of terms. So not just brand name on its own, but also brand name bed frames, brand name kitchenware, etc. And that allows us to capture as much of that search demand as possible. And we compared that against a baseline of unbranded search terms. So users just searching for bed frames, users just searching for lampshades or AstroTurf. That allowed us to compare one against the other. And then as our campaign hit, we tracked that difference between the two. Is there a significant difference? As there was. As you can see in the charts, actually, how far we move away from that baseline, simply based on our work. And then after that, based on that last question, how can we relate that to spend? We built a causal model between the spend of our campaign and the brand awareness at the same time to model, if you want to maintain these additional 50,000 searches per day, this is how much you need to be spending.
So almost a bit like a media mix modeling sort of smaller sort of example of it as well. I think what's really interesting is you can go down to that really product level as well. It's just not top category. You actually can home down on that, which is really interesting. So what were some of the impacts that you had in terms of, what did we actually see in terms of this brand study?
Yeah. We performed the brand study as part of a post-campaign analysis. So I can't take responsibility for the additional 50,000 searches a day, but it was an additional 50,000 searches a day that we were able to deliver, which is really exciting. Around a 70% increase in brand demand. They were really impressed with them. We're competing with Nielsen and other huge survey-based respondents. They were still very impressed with it. They said amazing an awful lot of times, which is really exciting. But also our recommendations led to their long-term strategy. They continued spending our recommended amount that allowed them to maintain that search demand, leading to that 11% brand increase year on year, which is quite significant for an already huge furniture brand.
Sounds like you had quite a big impact there as well. So I think that's probably a good place to finish in terms of understanding the impact. But this is the end of our Insights series now. You can catch up on these online. So please do make sure you do. But in the meantime, we're just going to switch off quickly while we receive questions from the audience, and then Joe will answer these for you. Hello guys, and welcome back. So we have a couple of questions in which we'll run through. So the first one we have here for you, Joe, is how far back should you look when measuring brand, especially considering COVID and the past few turbulent years?
For sure. It's a fantastic question because traditional brand surveys, they only exist if you've done them. The benefits of search demand data is if you have the right connections to the API, you can go back 5 years to get a true baseline rather than something that might have been impacted by a global pandemic, for example. Yeah, as I said, we go back 5 years. That allows us to create a really comprehensive baseline. Effectively, we're able to see those seasonal trends year on year and discount those huge market shifts effectively. If you don't do that, you can be really limited by potentially having large impacts on the market and not being able to see the statistical significance. It'll still be within those confidence intervals. You need to go back as far as possible. It's probably the best answer.
That's really interesting to know that you've got to look 5 years back, and I think it makes complete sense as to why you might want to do that. I guess the next question is, after the initial spike, how long do you track a specific campaign and its impact on the brand?
Yeah, how far back and how far forward? In terms of how far forward, we do our post-campaign analysis around a month after the campaign's finished. That gives us enough time to see how brand demand has stabilized. Generally, people forget about things after about a week. If it sticks in their mind, it'll stay there longer. So the drumming gorilla, for example, will stay in everyone's mind forever. I hope at least. And that's why we're tracking for as long as possible. We go definitely beyond a week. A month gives us that time to see how things stabilize over time, because that's where clients want to be. Do you need to be doing constant business as usual awareness campaigns, or can you hit with a headliner and then take a step back?
It seems logical as well to look at a month afterwards. I think a lot of studies do require at least a month to sort of 6 weeks, don't they, to actually gather their insights and sort of level it out to make sure that what we're actually seeing is significant. And that was greatly answered by you, Joe, but that is the end, unfortunately, of our Insight series. Please do catch up on demand if you missed these ones, and obviously see you guys soon. Bye.